everyone, and welcome on into the Betting Pros podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Viola, and joining me as always, none other than the Oracle himself, Matthew Freedman. And today we have a very special guest with us. VSiN's own Wes Reynolds is here to help us break down the Week 2 lines. Wes, how are you doing today? It is a pleasure to have you here.
Good to be on with you guys. Week 2, it's always the overreaction week, right? But some of the reactions need to be reactions based on what we saw. But I think this is kind of a tricky card this week. It's not like last week when I know, Tom, you and I were talking in the lead up before we started recording here, that last week we kind of thought was going to be a little bit of carnage, especially was in a lot of the survivor pools, a lot of these favorites going down. But I think really one of the reasons was because week 1 has almost become the new week 4 in NFL preseason, I think, with so many of these starters sitting out, especially these quarterbacks. Quarterbacks were 3-8 that did not take a snap in the preseason. So it takes a couple weeks for these guys to develop chemistry with the receivers and especially with the offensive line. I think that's what I really noticed in week 1. A lot of these offensive lines very much out of kilter.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that. The fact that there's a lot of rust to shake off for a lot of these teams. And we saw just too many large favorites, too many touchdown home favorites that just could not cover that kind of spread. Matt, what did you think from week 1?
Yeah, I mean, an entertaining week. It was boring, like in the first go of it, like the early slate for the first, like 3 quarters, relatively boring, low scoring games. And then like all of them came together and we had some pretty epic finishes there. And then the afternoon slate, not many close games there, but it was fun to see the Chiefs just absolutely ball out. So a good slate, and I think it has resulted in some inflated lines for week 2. With the overreaction that we almost always see. So it's an interesting slate for sure.
I love how you talk about how a lot of the games were boring and then they all come together and we got exciting finishes. But your favorite game, the one you wanted to highlight, was the absolute blowout that wasn't competitive, not interesting, decided in the first quarter.
It wasn't interesting and like, oh, this is a close game, but it's sort of compelling of like, how good is this Chiefs team? Because for me, that was one of the big questions entering the year, where I was aggressively rating them in my power rating system. And I don't want to say like I was right, but, like it's an indication that I wasn't horribly wrong in terms of week 1 and, continue to evaluate and see how they do after that. But it was nice to see them be inventive and be able to scheme in a new way and move on from Tyreek Hill and still have an awesome offense.
My preseason terrible time take was like the smartest guy in the room take was the Chiefs are going to struggle. And then I saw 2 preseason series and I was like, okay, we're good. None of that. They're just fine. Well, I'm glad I got off that.
To your guys' point, like I was saying, with Kansas City, they take a different approach here because, look, you always want to protect your stars and not get them hurt and have them available for the regular season. But if you see what Andy Reid does, and he didn't do it every game, I don't think in the third game Mahomes and company really played, but that first preseason game against the Bears, like if there was a game to sit, guys, it might have been that one. Mahomes and the starters played essentially the first quarter, and that's what Reid always does in the preseason. It's like, okay, the ones are going to play the first quarter, the twos are going to play the second quarter, and then everybody else is going to finish the game in the second half. And I think that there's something to that, even if you're only getting limited reps on 1 or maybe even 2 series in the first quarter, you're getting live game reps. And it's still, people might call it fake football. It's still real football because guys are playing for jobs. And this is still for real, even though in the end of the game, it doesn't really matter. But still, I think that speaks to why you saw the Chiefs so sharp. And that's one of the games I didn't have action on for week 1 last Sunday. But, when it plays out, you're like, yeah, you kind of see that, they're sharp to start the season. And some of these other teams are still really trying to figure it out.
I think that you're completely right with that. It's without the 4th week of the preseason to really play all of those other guys and use the 3rd week as a dress rehearsal. It is that teams are going to be sharper if they are taking advantage, like Andy Reid is, of, okay, I'm going to drip feed my team, get them just ready so that they're coming back from the offseason, and they get to week 1 and they have at least a ramp up into full game speed.
Can I push back just a little bit? Not to say that you guys are wrong. I think generally you're right. I do think that the McVay anecdote is interesting with him always resting his team during the preseason, and then up until this season being 5-0 against the spread in week 1, where his
Right.
teams historically, and so maybe this is just a McVay specific thing where whatever it is, something that they're doing in training camp, his teams normally are sharp in the first couple of weeks of the season, even though they're not getting that action. But I do think that we haven't seen enough of a sample to be able to say that other coaches have the ability to replicate what McVay has done. He might be the outlier.
Right.
The other flip side here to this argument is you look at the Packers, they get shellacked twice in a row in week 1 now, going back to last season. But what else did the Packers do last year? They won the NFC. They were the 1 seed.
Mm-hmm.
It is that question of, does the preseason rest make you sharper later in the season? Is it by that point it doesn't really matter, and that you've gone over the course of a whole season, and on aggregate, the rest in the beginning there doesn't affect you by then? Who's to say? I'm not sure. I'm not claiming that I know the answer, and I'm saying that teams should or shouldn't start their starters in the preseason.
And in general, what we're seeing in week 1, too, I think why we see the underdogs do so well. Everybody, I know this is going to be coach speak and a cliche. We're all 0-0. But in reality, they are in week 1. So you get all these teams, and I had a couple ugly underdogs. Unfortunately, Tom's Jets didn't get there for me. That was the outlier. But most of these bad underdogs actually did get there, because you had the Bears and the Seahawks. Those are 2 examples, and those are 2 teams that I don't think are going to be very good. So I don't think you want to say, okay, really upgrade these guys because they got to win in week 1. I still think they're bad teams, but when you heard all summer that, you're getting crapped on, and you got schmucks like me that are betting Bears for the worst record at 12-1 at the end of the season, they come out and play very well. It's kind of a perfect storm for some of these road favorites to go out and lay an egg a little bit in week 1. Denver, of course, did it on Monday night. Not the best performance for Nathaniel Hackett. I'm not willing to fire him and call him the worst coach ever after week 1, but it wasn't just the end. There was some questionable, designs there on the goal line. So it was a bad performance. I'm willing at least to dismiss it as that from week 1. So that's why you don't necessarily want to overreact. But going back to what you said about the Chiefs, look, they were very sharp. And I was wondering, okay, have we downgraded the Chiefs too much? Or is it that we upgraded the rest of the division just to say that they got better? Because all the rest of the division teams obviously made very notable acquisitions.
You completely hit the nail on the head with the wildness of week 1 and Nathaniel Hackett's schemes being a little suspect. I'm willing to say that you should probably be fired if you run out of the shotgun on the goal line. I don't think you should have a job in the NFL. That's just my opinion here.
Yeah. I look, I'm old school in that way. It's like, okay, there are some times, you can run pistol or something like that, but a lot of times, hat on hat. And I mean, I know that sounds like, I'm back in the Stone Age here saying that, but it's like, line up, get me a yard, get me in the end zone. And sometimes it is that simple, and we overcomplicate things in this game.
I just loved the Twitter takes of, why is Melvin Gordon running that ball at the 1? It should be Javonte Williams. He doesn't fumble that. And oh man, that was pretty sweet. Some instant karma watching that happen. But right now, guys, let's dive into some week 2. We've spent enough time talking about what was. We need to talk about what will be. And let's start off with 2 teams that, frankly, I am struggling to get a read on here through 1 week. We have the New England Patriots at the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers, of course, were able to win that overtime Cincinnati game that nobody really seemed to want to win. The Patriots got shellacked by the Dolphins yet again. BetMGM has this line at Patriots -2 on the road. And Matt, what are you thinking here as far as the side in this game?
Yeah, I like the Steelers in this spot, and there are matchups in it that I like, but a lot of it is just Tomlin as a dog and Tomlin at home, right? As an underdog, he's 46-23-2 against the spread for his career. Like, that is a phenomenal record. At home, 63-55-3, and you put it together, Tomlin as a home underdog is 14-3-2 against the spread. I know TJ Watt is out, that definitely hurts this defense. And I think Watt is worth maybe a point and a half to the spread. He's one of the few non-quarterbacks who actually makes an impact against the line. But I still think that the Steelers have a little, I wouldn't say an advantage, but I don't think they are as disadvantaged as people expect them to be without TJ Watt. So last year, the Patriots had one of the best rushing offenses in the league. The Steelers had a mediocre at best run defense. In week one, though, it looked pretty different against the rebuilt Bengals offensive line. The Steelers' defensive front seven, they were pretty strong. They held running back Joe Mixon to just 3 yards per carry on 27 attempts. And like the Bengals, the Patriots, they altered their offensive line this offseason. They traded guard Shaq Mason. They lost left guard Ted Karras. They moved offensive tackle Trent Brown and Isaiah Wynn switched sides to left tackle to right tackle and right tackle to left tackle. Michael Onwenu, he went from right tackle in 2020 and left guard and right tackle last year to right guard. And then they drafted Cole Strange. So they have a significantly rebuilt offensive line. And on top of that, they shifted away this offseason from a gap-heavy power rushing scheme to a Shanahan-style zone blocking scheme. And that's not to say that they are all zone blocking now, but they have moved in that direction, and the results were not positive in week one. Their running backs combined for just 71 yards on 19 carries. And TJ Watt, obviously great player, defensive player of the year. Where he makes the biggest difference is as a pass rusher, not as a run defender. The Steelers still have Cameron Hayward, Larry Ogunjobi, Chris Wormley, Tyson Alualua. They have those guys in the interior to be able to challenge the Patriots in the trenches. And I think with the Patriots, especially with Mac Jones having the back issue that he's dealing with, I think they're going to lean all the more into the running game. Not as if they need much of an excuse to lean on the running game anyway. That's what their offense is predicated on. I just don't know how much success they are going to have running the ball against the Steelers front. And even without TJ Watt, I think they're still going to be able to assert themselves in that way. So I think this is a closer game than not a closer game than people would expect, but I think the Steelers are able to keep it close, and I think they should actually be favored in this spot.
Go ahead, Tom.
Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Wes.
No, I was going to say, for me, even though it's dropped a little bit, I still like the total at under 40.5. I still think that there's a little bit of value there, even though 41 is kind of an old key number with totals, but maybe not in the new NFL with more possessions and obviously more kicking game problems with the extra points being missed. But I still think that the under can be sponsored here, because if you look at the Patriots now, second straight road game, only scored 7 in Miami. This isn't a recent pattern, though, for the Patriots. If you go back all the way to 2016, I think Patriots on the road, correlating that with the unders, it hits like 2/3 of the time. This is going back to Tom Brady being the quarterback in Foxborough. So this isn't just exclusively a Mac Jones thing. I thought the Patriots defense was a little bit better in the second half. They had only allowed like 70 yards until they fumbled at the end, trying to get it to a 1-score game. And then Miami was just able to run out the clock with 50 more yards. But I thought the defense was okay. Patriots still struggle to run the ball. They really struggled to run the ball in the preseason. I think the rise in the line, because it was down at 1.5. Now you're seeing some 2 and even some 2.5 in the market. I think it's because they think Mac Jones is going to go ahead and play here, so they're not have to go to Brian Hoyer. Whereas I think if they went with Brian Hoyer, then the Steelers absolutely would be favorites. And there's maybe a discussion of whether they should be or not. So Steelers on a teaser leg, I think would make sense. I don't know if I'm willing to take the 2, but I like these teasers, and that's kind of a general point I want to make about these long teasers, which historically are very good. Obviously, teasing through the 3 and the 7, even though those numbers may not be as key as they were even 5 or 10 years ago. But I think those numbers are more key when you have lower totals, because I think we can use last Thursday night's game as an example. Those 6 points don't have as much value when you have one of the top offenses like a Buffalo, like a Kansas City. But when you have these teams that are more middle of the pack or even down below the Mendoza line on offense, and you have these low totals, then those long teasers are going to matter. And I think you saw that materialize in that Cleveland-Carolina game last week.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
Wes,
absolutely.
Well, Wes, you talk about potential teaser spots. If you're looking for something to pair the Steelers with, the Saints at 2.5 are someone you have your eye on here against the Bucs.
Yeah, I bet 3 already. And, I think you might see 3 again, depending on what the injury report is for Tampa Bay. But I just look at the fact that now their left tackle is questionable. They already lost Ryan Jensen. They already lost Aaron Stinney. We know that they were replacing guys on the O-line anyway. Shaq Mason is new, even though TB12 has played with him for years up in New England. But this offensive line, and I think you saw the game plan. I don't even think it was just game specific against Dallas. I think Tampa Bay is going to try to run the ball a little bit more this year. And I think that's the direction of Tom Brady saying, okay, let's mix it up, because all these great quarterbacks, everybody thinks that, okay, they want to pile up these stats and whatnot. All the elite quarterbacks, Manning, Brady, Mahomes, all these Rodgers, they're like, hey, let's run the ball a little bit more, because they don't want to get hit, especially if they're not confident about the offensive line. So I still think even when Godwin gets back, I think he's going to be out for this one. But even when he gets back, I don't expect you're going to see Tom Brady throwing the ball 35, 40 times. He led the league in pass attempts last year at 44 years old. I don't think Leftwich and Todd Bowles, and more specifically Tom Brady, want that to happen again. So you're going to see them run the ball, and I think the Saints' pass rush can be dangerous, even though they had 0 sacks last week. But you get Davenport, you get Jordan. They've been able to get pressure on Tom Brady, and they've really kind of been his kryptonite, except for that playoff game. In the regular season, the Saints have really owned these guys, and I know kind of a not complete performance from New Orleans in week 1 in Atlanta, but they did come back from down 16. So sometimes there's something to be said for momentum. So I think the Saints could absolutely be a teaser piece with the Steelers, one we'll get to later too with the Carolina Panthers.
I'm completely with you here. I was actually listening to our friends over with our sister at Fantasy Pros, Joe Pisapia and Andrew Erickson were talking earlier on their show about the Saints defense is kind of built to stop Tom Brady. When they face a mobile quarterback like Marcus Mariota, they don't quite know what to do and they struggle a little bit there, but take those struggles against the Falcons with a grain of salt. And also, I think Jameis Winston started to look good. You break down that fourth quarter, 200 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. He figured it out in the fourth, and part of that is getting comfortable with his new receivers. Michael Thomas didn't really get a chance to play with him at all. Chris Olave obviously knew. He's got a new suite of weapons to work with, and I think we're only going to see him improve over time here. Matt, any thought on the Saints?
Yeah, absolutely with Wes. I have them in the Betting Pros app at Saints +3. I bet it on the look ahead line because I thought this line would move down. I didn't think it was going to move up. I thought if anything, it would move down. And we have seen that. The matchup between Marshawn Lattimore and Mike Evans is must watch TV 2 times a year. Those guys legitimately hate each other. And for some reason, even though Lattimore is not a big guy, he has been able historically, with the exception of a couple of games, he has been able to neutralize Mike Evans, which really changes the structure of what the Buccaneers are able to do on offense. And that really is the key for the Saints here. So I do like them, like Wes, at this number of +3.
Guys, real quick, I want to talk to you about Sleeper. Sleeper is the fastest growing fantasy platform today with millions of players. You probably already have a fantasy league on there. My friends and I changed over this year, and I absolutely love it. It's a game-changing product unlike anything else in the industry. And now you can win on Sleeper by playing their new over-under game. It's super simple. First, in any sport, choose 2 or more players that you like and pick the over-under. For example, rushing yards in a football game or number of points in a basketball game. Then choose the amount of money you want to enter into the contest. If you pick correctly, you can win anywhere from 2 times to over 20 times the money you put in. The main reason I'm excited about Over Under on Sleeper is that it's the only app where I can join my friends' contests and play together. It's got a built-in group chat where I can see and copy my group's picks with the tap of a button, along with Over Under integrated into the fantasy experience itself. It's insanely fun to ride it out together, so stop what you're doing and download Sleeper now to play their new Over Under game. Have fun with your friends and make some money. Use the promo code BettingPros when you sign up for a Sleeper account today, and Sleeper will automatically credit your account $100 to get you started. Terms and conditions apply. See sleeper.com for details. Now, on our last episode, we had Captain Jack on. He talked about a bridge too far and how some line movements are just a little bit too far and they come back the other way. By the way, fantastic show. Check that out once you're done here. But one of those games that he said would go too far was the Rams versus the Falcons. It moved to 10.5 very briefly, but it's back down to 10 at BetMGM. The Rams, of course, favored in SoFi Stadium here. I personally like them to come off the mat after that shellacking by Buffalo. I think they're going to come out strong, and I think we're going to see the Falcons regressing a little bit. But Matt, you particularly have a lean in this game, and it is towards the Rams as well, right?
Yeah, I like the Rams. 10.5 is, I believe that is the number that I'm seeing in the market. If there's a 10 out there, I think it's an auto bet to be able to have the opportunity to push at that key number.
I am looking at a 10 right now on BetMGM as we speak.
That's wonderful. Yes, I love the Rams here at 10. I honestly, I'm surprised it got to 10. The Rams are dealing with some injuries. Logan Buss, Ryan Allen, Joseph Noteboom, like they're missing some offensive linemen. Van Jefferson, their wide receiver is out there. Their long snapper didn't practice on Wednesday. That feels like that might be like one of those like very sneakily important injuries. So like, let's monitor to see what's going on with him.
As the Bengals well learned last week.
Yes. So, monitor the injury situation for the Rams, but I don't know, man. I think this is an overreaction to two things, like what we saw out of the Rams in week 1 and what we saw out of the Falcons. But this line was 13.5 in the offseason look ahead market. Last Thursday, in the week ahead look ahead market, it was 13. And when it opened, it was, I believe, 11.5. And, now it's down. I think this is too much. Sean McVay 8-3 against the spread in weeks 1 and 2. That's sort of like the golden time to bet on McVay. Like all other periods of the season, he's basically 500 against the spread. To start the season is when McVay does his best. And he's 11-6 against the spread off a loss. I think the key for this game is Cooper Kupp going against two slot cornerbacks who are horrifyingly overmatched, right? Like we know who Cooper Kupp is. If he's not the best receiver in the league, he's one of the best. The Falcons defense is horrible against the pass. Last year it was number 29 in pass DVOA. Last week it was number 30. We have, our internal power rankings of the different units, and the Rams pass catchers have a very significant edge over the Falcons secondary. They have strength on the perimeter. AJ Terrell and Casey Hayward are good cover corners, but Kupp lines up in the slot, and that's where D. Alford lined up last week, an undrafted rookie. Good luck putting him there. And journeyman Mike Ford, who has allowed 9.9 yards per target for his career. It doesn't matter which one of those guys is out there. Neither one of them is going to be able to manage Cooper Kupp. So I think that's one of the keys to this matchup, but I think Kupp goes off again. And I think the Rams punish the Falcons for the sins of the Bills last week.
I think the other big factor here is that pass rush, like you talk about for the Rams. Aaron Donald isn't going to have problems with a mobile quarterback. I think they're going to be able to get to Mariota in ways the Saints just weren't. Wes, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, ultimately it's a pass, but if I were to play it, I would rather lay it with the Rams, especially at 10. With that over adjustment, I think on the look ahead line, Falcons just aren't a team I'm necessarily interested in backing at this standpoint. And Tom, I think you hit it in terms of the fact that they're kind of a tricky matchup for the Saints because they're, Mariota's quarterback. They can get out of the pocket, but, Mariota's a guy that will turn it over to you if you let him. And he did it a couple times last week. I think he could do it a couple times again. I want to see that Rams. This is one I'm waiting to see. I want to see if that Rams offensive line, if that was like, okay, they've got legit issues, even though they returned everybody except Noteboom is new. And Noteboom, I think, was very capable in relief last year. So I was a little bit surprised to see those guys give up 7 sacks, even though Buffalo Buffalo has a pretty good pass rush. So I want to see if that was an aberration or if that was a trend. Atlanta, interestingly enough, did put up 4 sacks, but to Matt's point, this secondary, if they don't get home on the pass rush, this secondary is absolutely going to be hurting. And I don't think maybe, Matthew Stafford doesn't even have to go with deep balls. He can go underneath the cup or Skoranek or some of those guys, hit Higbee and just kind of work the middle of the field and get yards after catch on these guys. So, I'd rather lay it rather than play it, but I think I'm going to stay out.
As a Cooper Kupp fantasy owner, I'm very excited for this game. But a game that I am not excited for at all is watching my Jets take on the Cleveland Browns. They are 6-point dogs in Cleveland, which will be sporting their new elf mascot on the 50-yard line. As a general rule of gambling, I refuse to take a team. I will absolutely not lay a touchdown with a team with an elf on its field. I'm taking Jets +6 solely off of that. Wes, you're also interested, but I feel you're going to have a different take on why you like the Jets +6 in this one.
Yeah, and now you can get 6.5 basically in the market. There's a couple rogue 7s where it's juiced a little heavier on the Jet side, of course, on a key number. But, the Jets last week, I'm not going to be misled by the stats because they were down the whole game, even though it was 10-3 until Lamar hit that deep ball to Duvernay, and then it was all she wrote. But you're going to see, okay, the Jets out-yarded Cleveland, but they ran 26 more plays as well. But one thing about the Jets, I know Baltimore was down Dobbins and they were down Edwards, but the Jets' strength, as you know, Tom, is against the run defensively. So I still think even if those guys were to play, they were going to have a pretty good performance against the run. Baltimore really didn't do a lot except for a couple big plays, but that was enough. And obviously you don't want Joe Flacco throwing it 59 times a game. That is not a recipe for success, but it's really what I'm looking at with Cleveland. And I thought Cleveland was the better team against Carolina. They got that running game going early, and that's what allowed them to keep the lead for most of the game until the end when they had to have that 58-yarder. But Carolina was much the better team in the second half, I felt. Cleveland was good in the first half. And then when I look, it's like, do I really want to lay a touchdown with Jacoby Brissett here? 18 of 34 for 147 and a touchdown. This is not the Jacoby Brissett that was in Indianapolis when Andrew Luck announced his retirement basically 2 weeks before the regular season was to start. You saw him in Miami. He's had some injuries. He looked a little bit slower, a little bit less athletic. And, they're going to try to rely on that running game. And that's not really the way you beat the Jets. I think the Jets can absolutely hold up front. So Brissett is going to have to make plays. Didn't really make a ton of plays in the passing game. It was a lot of short passing to the running backs, to Kareem Hunt out of the backfield, trying to hit the tight ends over the middle. You didn't really see him take any deep shots necessarily. So this number just looks a little bit too big for me. And plus the emotion of Cleveland, because everybody, whenever you talk about a revenge game for a player, it's always one side of the coin and they don't look at the other side. They're like, oh, Baker Mayfield wants to beat his old team's ass. And it's like, you don't think they want to kick Baker's butt too, of their former quarterback, and be like, yeah, man, the grass isn't greener on the other side here, pal. So, that's what I think got to kind of happen there. So Cleveland comes off a little bit of an emotional, kind of a personal win in week 1, and you get the Jets who, aren't very good. They're having Joe Flacco who's well past his prime. But I think this number, once you see 7, and I think you'll see 7 at maybe some of the more of the square stores, I think they'll get gobbled up very quickly. I like the Jets.
If I could get 7 in this game, I'd be through the roof. But your point about Jacoby Brissett having to make plays, I like Lamar Jackson to make plays, especially against the Jets. I think the Jets defense can handle Jacoby Brissett. Matt, what do you think?
Brissett is what I've always said about him. He's a good enough guy not to lose a game for you, but he's not good enough to go win it for you. Whereas Lamar Jackson last week was good enough with 2 plays, basically, to go win the game for him.
He's a bus driver. You trust him to get the kids to school, but you're not giving him the keys to a Formula One car.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Good analogy.
Matt, what do you think? Matt, what do you think about this game?
Yeah, I have the Jets as 5-point underdogs. And so if it got to 7, I would bet it, given that I can get the push on the key number. Underneath that, I probably still technically should bet it, but I just don't like this Jets team enough to do that.
That's a fair point. I can't find a hole in that argument. To me, though, like it goes back to that being a Jets fan. There's 3 weeks every season where the Jets randomly just get up and go win a game they shouldn't win. And I feel it in my gut that this is that kind of game. I think that this is one of those spots where we're going to be getting some Survivor contestants knocked out again because they just fade the Jets and think, oh, I'm not going to take Cleveland later in the season. I'll take them now. I think the Jets are fully capable of winning this game outright.
I mean, I think that's fair. I look at the Browns, and I don't think that they're all that great of a team. Like they've got pieces. They certainly have players, but their offense is really bogged down because of the quarterback situation. That said, I think they'll probably be able to run the ball, and I think that I wouldn't say that matters the most, but I think their offense will look competent because of their running game, and they don't have to rely too much on their quarterback. Like I think they hide Brissett in this game.
If only they could have foreseen quarterback issues coming and done something to avoid those. I don't know. But the next game up, speaking of quarterbacks here, we've got Derek Carr going up against Kyler Murray. And the new Call of Duty did just have its announcement trailers coming out today. That's got to worry you a little bit if you're taking the Cardinals here. +6 versus the Raiders right now. Let me see the most updated line here. Our friends at BetMGM have this down to 5.5. And are you still interested in betting this game in this spot, Matt, with at 5.5?
Yeah, I have a ticket at 5.5. I mean, this one scares me because I have it power rated at 1.5. And like this is out of all of the games I have this week, this is the one where I am way off of the market. For most of them, I'm at market or at the most like 2 points off. But this one, I'm 4 points off, and I think it's I think it's an overreaction to the game that we saw last week, and I think that there's a chance that some of these guys who were out last week end up coming back this week, specifically JJ Watt, which that would be significant. But one of the big things for me is that this feels like a yo-yo type of game. Like Cliff Kingsbury, like he is a zigzag kind of coach. Like you clearly bet against him when he's at home or when he's favored. You historically bet on him when he's on the road or an underdog. And he's both in this situation. And so it's a really good thing. Like 17-6-2 against the spread on the road, 18-8-2 against the spread as an underdog. You put it together as a road dog, Kingsbury is an outrageous 13-3-2 against the spread. And the Raiders have some negative trends of their own, specifically Derek Carr, who is 13-23-1 against the spread as a favorite. It gets worse. As a favorite against a team that went to the playoffs last year, he is 1-6-1 against the spread. It's not good. I think the matchup for this game is Kyler Murray versus that Raiders coverage unit. Say whatever you want about Murray. The Call of Duty jokes, which are fantastic, by the way.
There's a beta this weekend.
Yeah.
All I'm saying.
I know. It does make me nervous. I should have checked the release schedule. The perennial second half fall off with Kyler Murray, like that's a real thing. But he's a top 10 quarterback, still a top 10 quarterback, especially early in the year before he's accumulated all the hits that come with the NFL season. And yes, he's without perimeter wide receivers DeAndre Hopkins, Antoine Wesley. He might also be without slot wide receiver Rondale Moore. But given how Greg Dortch, I can't believe I'm saying Greg Dortch's name, but given how Dortch played last week, the loss of Rondale Moore might not be as big as I would have anticipated. But the Raiders also have issues. In week 1, they allowed Justin Herbert to go off, 76.5% completion rate, 10 adjusted yards per attempt. They were number 30 in dropback EPA per play. And it's not as if they were great in pass defense last year. They were number 26 in dropback EPA per play. And part of the challenge for the Raiders is that they've experienced heavy turnover this offseason at cornerback. So their back end unit doesn't have great cohesion. Last year, their top perimeter corners were Casey Hayward, Trayvon Mullen, Brandon Fashion, and Desmond Trufant. All of those guys are gone. They've replaced them with Rock Ya-Sin and Anthony Everett. But Everett, he's already out with an injury, which means last year's number 5 perimeter cornerback for the team is now starting. That is really bad. And they have slot cornerback Nate Hobbs, who is a 2021 fifth rounder. He's okay. He keeps everything in front of him. The problem is he allows everything to be caught. He has an 81.4% completion rate allowed for his career. Like Greg Dortch could have 12 receptions in this game. And the safety duo of Jonathan Abram and Trevon Moehrig, mediocre, I think at best. And Moehrig has a hip injury. He didn't practice on Wednesday. And off-ball linebacker Denzel Perryman, he's their main off-ball coverage backer. He also didn't practice on Wednesday with an ankle injury. So the players are adjusting to a new scheme under defensive coordinator Patrick Graham. So you put all that together, and it just makes me skeptical about this Raiders secondary. And I think this line is an overreaction. The offseason market had this line at 2.5. The Thursday look ahead had this line still at 2.5. The market reopened at 3 on Sunday night, quickly moved to 3.5. And within 24 hours, it was at 5.5. And, now bouncing around between 5 and 6. Man, I think it's just an overreaction to how bad the Cardinals looked against the Chiefs in week 1. I think these teams are pretty comparable. So I will be taking the Cardinals, but I do know I am way off from the market with my line here. And so if I'm wrong, and there's a decent chance I'm wrong, if I'm wrong, I will be quickly adjusting my power ratings for the Cardinals next week.
I have a hard time envisioning the Raiders blowing any team out. And by definition, if they're going to win this game by around a touchdown, to me, that's as good as the Raiders can get when it comes to blowing anybody out. Mm-hmm. Like you said with the secondary, their early round draft woes over the last several years have obliterated any ability for the secondary to be good. Like you said, they're using 5th round guys to try and plug these holes. That's not going to work for you moving forward. And also, JJ Watt broke just a couple minutes ago, said he is expecting to play this weekend. He was back at practice today, so we can break that news here on this very much not live show. I think I'm with you here. I know you're lower on the Raiders than the market and maybe than myself even personally. I will be taking 5.5 points if I can get them with the Cardinals, especially if I can get 6. Wes, what do you think?
Cardinals are nothing for me for all the aforementioned reasons that Matt talked about. Just the Raiders with that secondary, they're not a team that you really want to lay as a big favorite. I think the Raiders are, by and large this season, they're going to be live as underdogs because they can throw the ball and they can gain chunk yardage plays in the passing game. So they're always going to be kind of live, even though they didn't quite get there last week against the Chargers. Certainly had a lot of opportunities to do so in the fourth quarter. But with Arizona, I think, look, everybody was down on them. The market was down on them. And look, I didn't like them, even though I didn't bet any of their season wins, either over or under. The market was down on them because of the whole Kyler thing, because of how long it took, and because of the fact that they just left you with a bad feeling at the end of the season. And sometimes that carries over. But usually with Arizona, they're quick starters and slow finishers historically. And then they get beat last week by a very sharp Kansas City team. And, maybe it's just that they got beat by a really good team, even though it was a very comfortable win. This is a big overreaction from the look-ahead line. And, usually when you see look-ahead line to what it reopens on Sunday evening, early Monday morning, usually you're getting a point and a half adjustment. You're not getting over a field goal adjustment here. So, yeah, this is Cardinals or nothing for me. This was a game I was looking to stay away from. But as I kind of look at it a little bit more, I'm starting to like the road underdog.
If you want to win a signed Joe Mixon Cincinnati Bengals jersey, courtesy of our friends at Pristine Auction, you need to subscribe to the Betting Pros YouTube channel right now. Comment below this video, and that is it. You will automatically be entered. We will be announcing a winner right here on the channel, so make sure to turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to claim your prize. From one team that left the Bay Area to another, the Santa Clara 49ers. They opened around 10 points. This line has fluctuated from 9.5 up to 10. BetMGM now has it at 8.5 points as home favorites against the Seahawks this week. And you want to talk about overreactions. This, to me, is a huge overreaction to the Seahawks win on Monday night. First off, you are 2 goal line fumbles away from the story of this game being completely different. And then I also, as much as I don't want to lay more than a touchdown with the 49ers, all I saw Monday night from the Seahawks was their strategy was allow the Broncos running backs to break off as many 10+ yard runs as possible so that they'd be tired on the goal line and fumble. That seems to be what they were working with, because they were getting gashed in the run game, which is what the 49ers are going to do against this team. Wes, what are you thinking here with the 49ers? You like them at 9, so I'm sure you like them at 8.5 in this spot, and I'm inclined to be right there with you.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at this, and I was on the Bears last week just because I kind of thought it was a perfect storm. Lance only making a second road start, no George Kittle. George Kittle's going to need to be Trey Lance's best friend, at least early on in this season, for his development. But I felt a little bit fortunate to get home with Chicago for the full game in the second half, because keep in mind, they were down 7-0. Then San Francisco goes and gets 3 right away on the first drive. So it's 10-0. The Bears had done nothing. Once the Bears decided they were going to play schoolyard ball with Justin Fields and get him out of the pocket and get the Niners defense, which is pretty fast for DeMeco Ryans, moving in a different direction, then all of a sudden you saw the Bears move the football. But if you look at the stats, and the box score, 331 to 203 yard advantage for the 49ers, 4.9 yards a play, which is not great, but 3.6 is even worse for the Chicago side, and yet somehow lost as 6.5, 7-point favorites. Bad weather conditions as well there in Chicago, so I felt that was kind of an equalizer. Meanwhile, you look at Seattle, and I was on the Seahawks on Monday night, felt very fortunate to get that home. I think Seattle kind of early on really surprised Denver, letting Geno get out of the pocket, get him on the move, and throwing the ball. I don't think Denver was expecting that, and I think that kind of set the tone for the game for Seattle to hang around. But if you look at the numbers, 433 yards for Denver, 253 for Seattle. Seattle did very little in the second half. So this could be, I think, that kind of like buy low or that buy low spot here for San Francisco. I know a lot of the market, I don't think, is going to want to lay that with Trey Lance. So, like, for some of these favorites, I don't expect this to be a very popular favorite in either the Circa Million or the Super Contest or any of picks contests throughout the week. I think they're very lukewarm on Trey Lance because, look, whenever the Twitter, herd basically has an opinion on one side, and look, I'm kind of mixed on Trey Lance, to be honest with you, but everybody was like, that's why they kept Jimmy G. That's why they kept Jimmy G. The guy has one bad game. So when you get the Twitter cacophony, I guess, on one side, I'm tending to look the opposite way. I think the 49ers could roll Seattle, even though this isn't as bad of a travel spot on a short week as it would normally be for the Seahawks. But I still don't think the Seahawks are good. I just think it was a good situation for them. And Denver obviously shot themselves in the foot on many occasions on Monday night.
Trey Lance is absolutely bad. I will die on this hill. But Matt, I know that you are about to come in here and talk about Kyle Shanahan's record as a favorite. So why don't you lay the stats on us?
Yeah, I was busy looking that up.
Yeah, they're not pretty.
Yeah, no, really bad. He and Cliff Kingsbury, it's like these guys are twins. All right, you bet Shanahan on the road, bet him as an underdog. You fade him at home, fade him as a favorite. As a home favorite, he is 6-15-1 against the spread. It is, and that's in the regular season. Absolutely atrocious. That said, I have this line at 9.25. So I'm right in the vicinity of where it is in the market right now. I'm just staying away. I'm staying away.
I'm with you. I don't want to bet on either side. I think that, like you said, Wes, the 49ers can blow out the Seahawks. Mm-hmm. I also don't necessarily trust them to do it. So I'm going to look elsewhere. Like this game of the Carolina Panthers going up against the New York Giants here. Carolina getting 2.5. BetMGM now has them more or less at 2. Wes, are you still betting them at 2?
Yeah, I would still bet it at 2, and I would certainly use it as a teaser. And, I was on the Giants last week, and they got outplayed in the first half, but then they came back. I thought they were the better team in the second half. Of course, Brian Dable making the decision to go for the lead, not necessarily the win, because there was over a minute left, and Randy Bullock did get a field goal attempt that he missed for Tennessee. But, you can kind of see it with the Giants, and why I think a lot of us did like their season wins over at 6.5 and 7. With Saquon Barkley, I do think they're a little bit of a different team. I just, he can run the ball, and he can catch the ball. He's very good in the passing game. Daniel Jones was actually efficient when you really looked at his numbers, but here's the bugaboo with him, and you saw it with Brian Dable getting into it with him on the bench. He still turns the ball over way too much, and that's what he's trying to do. Daniel Jones has proven he can make plays and that he gets outside the pocket and he can find receivers. And the Giants historically, even when McAdoo was the coach, even when Joe Judge was the coach, very good road underdogs with some really bad teams over the last few years in New York. So they were in that preferred role. They got home against Tennessee. Now you go home, they're a home favorite. Keep in mind against Carolina last year, when Carolina, I think it was week 7, I think Carolina was on like a 3-game losing streak. And Carolina was still laying a field goal at New York. Now I know New York had like no receivers hardly for that game, but still kind of a big difference at 2.5. So yeah, I do like Carolina. I think Carolina was better, like I was saying, in the second half. I think they were clearly the better team than Cleveland and figured it out a little bit. And also, that was Mayfield going against his old team, so the juices were flowing. And one of the things that you saw is he did fumble the ball 4 times. A couple of them were on that center quarterback exchange with the center Pat Elflein, and I just think that's a chemistry thing. That just takes time. And I think Mayfield was probably amped up and juiced up against his old team. So I would expect a little bit more of a composed Carolina team this time around. Certainly, I think that they are an absolute use in a teaser to get them to 8 or to get them to 8.5. Because I think, when you win in New York City, and Tom, you're a man of the East Coast, so when you win in New York City, they don't overreact. They don't overreact to bad news or good news there in New York. Straight even keel in the New York Post and whatnot. So, all of a sudden, Brian Dable, it's like, hey, we got something with this guy. And this just seems like the ripe for disappointment spot. Even though I like the Giants long term to go over their season wins, that's one thing I don't like to do early. I don't like to bet my season wins or my division or my make or miss the playoffs. You got to play this on a week-to-week basis. So I like Carolina here as a small underdog.
I will always bet on disappointment when it comes to New York sports teams. That is always the biggest lock that you can have. Matt, any thoughts on this game before we pivot to our final contest?
Yeah, it's one that I am certainly looking at for like circa million or pick contests like that. If I'm on a side, it is Carolina. It is not the Giants. As a home favorite, that feels disastrous for Daniel Jones.
I am completely right there with you guys. All right, one more contest here for us here. And it's another one of those 10-point favorites. We got a couple whoppers this week. This is one of them. The Bears head to Lambeau Field fresh off their win in the Soup Bowl. They head now to Lambeau to take on the Packers and Aaron Rodgers. The over-under on receivers that wind up dead in Green Bay this season is absolutely 1.5. I'm not even going to lay the under. But they do get Allen Lazard back for this game. They're going to be 10-point favorites here from BetMGM. Matt, if you were to sign up for a BetMGM account and use your promo code BettingPros to get a $1,000 risk-free bet, would you be using it on the Packers -10 in this spot?
I mean, that would be a little fishy of me, but yeah, sure. I think I would. I think this should be above 10. So, it's 10. I think I'm going to take it with the push value there. There are injuries, obviously at the tackle situation that we saw last week. That was horrible. David Bakhtiari, Elgton Jenkins, both of them out last week. Allen Lazard out last week. Lazard, Jenkins, Bakhtiari, all of them practiced on a limited basis on Wednesday. So that is positive. I think there's a chance that at least 2 of those 3 guys returns, which that would make a pretty massive difference. Justin Fields, not like a 2-game sample is all that much, but he's 0-2 against the spread against the Packers, 3-7 against the spread as an underdog. And then Aaron Rodgers, he's got the sample size that actually has some significance. 65, 34-4 at home against the spread. He crushes at Lambeau Field. Like, that is one of the few stadiums that actually has a home field advantage. And Aaron Rodgers in division, 48-30 against the spread. At home in division, 26-12. And going against the Bears, we know he owns the Bears. He's owned them his entire life. 20-7 against the spread against the Bears. In primetime, 38-27-2 for Aaron Rodgers. This Bears secondary, I think, is going to get sliced up. I don't think there's a question as to whether Aaron Rodgers bounces back in this game. I think the question is, how big will the bounce back be? And this Bears secondary, Tom, you said at the Super Bowl, like, I'm not putting any stock in what it was that they were able to do last week. That was a weather-aided performance going against Trey Lance. And I wouldn't say it was his first start, but his first start as the starter for the team. I mean, this is a situation where Rodgers absolutely dominates. The Bears have 2 rookies starting in their secondary, slot cornerback Kyler Gordon and strong safety Jaquan Brisker. You have Lazard going against Kyler Gordon. You have Robert Tonyan going against Brisker. Those guys might be the 2 most trusted pass catchers that Aaron Rodgers has. I think he is going to exploit those 2 rookies in particular over and over and over. And this feels like a 14-point game, not a 10-point game.
I'm inclined to be right there with you, Wes. What do you think?
Yeah, this is the favorite of all the big double-digit favorites this week that I would most want to back for all the reasons that Matt said in terms of the trends. And look, I'm not a big trend player. I like to say the trend should be your acquaintance and not necessarily your friend. But when you have these many, I think, on the Green Bay side, and also Matt LaFleur, by the way, 9-0 straight up and against the number off a loss. Teams that lose by double digits, too, in week 1, 40 and 25 and 2 against the spread. So, this is, I think, ripe for the picking. I think all the circumstances, it was just kind of the perfect storm for an upset for Chicago in week 1. I'm not one of these guys that's going to buy in and say, okay, this team's the real deal. They're going to be better than I thought. They are going to be who we thought they were, as Dennis Green once said. And I think what we think that they are is a very poor team. And just going into Green Bay, I would much rather lay it rather than play it. And these are usually the ones where I'm more often than not either passing or on the other side here. But this is an underdog I'm absolutely not interested in. So I would either lay it or pass here with the pack.
Can we talk about for a second the fact that LaFleur's been the coach for 3-4 years now? And he's only had 9 opportunities to come back from a loss. Like, yeah, obviously, there are a couple playoff games that get tossed out there, but that's pretty incredible. Guys, that is going to do it for us in terms of our slate breakdown. Real quick here before we get out, if you have to pick a survivor team this week, where are you going? Wes, we'll start with you.
Oh, boy, this is tough. I would have had Philadelphia last week, so had to survive a backdoor. If I'm going survivor, and look, I know you want to save teams, but I think Green Bay.
Matt, how about you?
Honestly, I haven't thought about survivor at all because I did not survive last week. Pain, maximal pain, if I cared. But man, I don't. San Francisco is kind of intriguing because
that won't get used either.
Yeah. I don't think I'm going to want to be on San Francisco all that much for the rest of the season. And so this might be the spot to use them.
I think San Francisco is a pretty good spot here, but the team I'm going to go with, one we didn't talk about on today's show, the Bengals. You're going up against the Cowboys with Cooper Rush. I feel like you have to play that.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it. One quick question here, since we did, Tom, you did just mention the Bengals and the Cowboys, and we haven't talked about it. One of the few games we didn't talk about, and it feels like, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, Wes. The move from Dak Prescott to Cooper Rush, obviously a significant drop down. And, maybe that Cowboys offense was being overinflated in the market anyway, given some of the issues that they had. And now, their offensive line is also pretty decimated. This line, let me see what it is right now. It might be as high as 8. 8 right now at BetMGM. That feels like it's too high.
Yes.
And so I have taken a position on the Cowboys at 8. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. But this feels like an overreaction.
Yeah, I agree. I think anything north of 7, has to be an absolute take on Dallas, because one of the things you want to look at, and look, I know that there's a drop off, so don't misunderstand what I'm saying here, but the Cowboys didn't look very good anyway against Tampa Bay. I just think it was kind of a chemistry thing. I worry a little bit about the offensive line now with McGovern out, and of course we do have Tyron Smith, having to be out for an indefinite amount of time, but. Yeah, I do think it would be Cowboys or nothing for me. I think anything north of 7, because Cincinnati, by the way, even though they made a lot of moves, not only in the draft and in free agency, it's going to take time for them. Joe Burrow threw a couple bad balls, but those 4 interceptions were not just necessarily on Joe Burrow. They were on the offensive line. So the Cowboys not only have problems there, but I think the Cincinnati Bengals also have problems there. And I think that those don't just get fixed in 1 week. It usually takes several weeks, I think, for, even being a little bit behind the curve on the offensive line to really get there. So that's absolutely what I could see. So Dallas, anything 7.5 or above for me would be, I think, at least worth a small play.
I will say the number in a lot of spots is still 7. You can still find a lot of 7s. I don't know if it's going to stay around 8 for very long. And you're right. When you swap out 3 of 5 offensive linemen, it takes time to build that cohesion. At 8, it's a pass for me. At 7, I'm still leaning Bengals here. I think that this team is better than what we saw against the Steelers, because mind you, 5 turnovers in that game, and they still only lost on a last-second field goal and should have won the game. Had they had their actual long snapper, the game's over in regulation. That's the thing for me where I'm like, this team might actually still be good. They're not going to turn the ball over 5 times every week.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's why I'm scared. I've taken the Cowboys at +8, but I don't like it.
Yeah. The concern, though, long-term for the Bengals is now that I know this is cliche, but they're the hunted instead of the hunter. So how do you deal with the fact that you weren't the plucky upstart last year? Now you're the team that represented the AFC in the Super Bowl, and people are gunning for you. People aren't just going to look past you on the schedule anymore. So, I think early in the season, that's why I was a little bit lower on the Bengals, at least to start out early, because I think they've got to get used to the fact that now they've got to deal with a whole new set of expectations.
I do agree with that. And you also have to play a first place schedule instead of a fourth place schedule now. But guys, that'll do it for us here today. Once again, head on over to BetMGM, get yourself signed up for an account, use the promo code BettingPros, and your first bet will be a $1,000 risk-free bet on whatever you want it to be. But for now, that is going to do it for us here. Wes, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Where can people find you and the great work you're doing?
Yeah, at Wes Reynolds and the number 1 on the tweets, and also at vsin.com. We write up different games. And then, of course, I am on Live Bet tonight every Monday through Friday from 6 to 9 Pacific, 9 to 12 Eastern with my co-host Femi Abebefe. So we get into the live betting, not only with football when we have it on during the weeknights, but we'll be having baseball playoffs soon. And especially when basketball gets started, it's going to really get humming and have a lot of stuff, and it'll move very fast for a 3-hour show.
Thank you guys so much for listening today. Don't forget to throw us that 5-star rating and that subscription. And of course, as always, click that notification button. Guys, for Matt Freedman and Wes Reynolds, I'm Thomas Viola, and let's cash some tickets.